Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Big from the Sticks, a longtime fan. A few years ago, someone asked a question on the show, Jim, about Vince versus Bischoff in a fight, and you said that Vince would destroy Eric Bischoff. You offhandedly mentioned that Bischoff's karate skills didn't help him when Ric Flair took him down and went for his eyes. I have not heard you mention it prior or since. What's the story behind that fight?
Oh, geez, I thought everybody knew that to begin with. That's why I didn't go into more detail when I mentioned that. It was after Bischoff had, how can I tell this story to bring it up to date? Ric Flair had not been being used. It was one of the periods where he wasn't being used on television, whatever the fuck they were trying to kill him in the booking. And that was when Reed was wrestling for the state title, right? Or some regional tournament in his amateur wrestling. And Flair was going to be there to see the big match. Well, then they called Flair and said he had to be at TV. And he said, well, I'm not going to be at TV. I'm going to be seeing my son wrestle his big championship match. And I've been at these other TVs and blah, blah, blah. So Bischoff, that's where, and correct me if I'm wrong on this timeline, Brian, since you remember everything. That's where Bischoff had the meeting of all the talent where he said that he was going to sue Flair into the poorhouse and blah, 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 right? Basically buried him.
Yeah, there was another meeting, too, I think, where he said the only people in this room who've ever drawn money are Hogan and Savage, and maybe he said Piper. But, like, you know, there's
it was Hogan, Savage, and Piper while Flair was in the room, but that was a different instance. But the point is, they did go to court over Flair missing the fucking Nitro they wanted him to come to, or the TV or whatever, to go see Reed's title match. And it went to court for a while. I can't remember what. And then finally, that's when Flair came back and did the reunion promo that everybody remembers, where he came back to the company right after that. But during that period of time, so it had to be early 98, was where WWF had a pay-per-view in Greensboro at the Coliseum, and Flair was on the outs with WCW, and I was talking to Flair on the phone, and me and Rick had basically worked out, well, what if while we were on the air on the WWF pay-per-view in Greensboro, Ric Flair and his son Reed just happened to walk into the building and just happened to walk and sit down in the front row seat, or two of them, and our announcers went over and mentioned that there was a wrestling champion from the state of North Carolina here in the audience, and went over and interviewed Reed with Rick just sitting there saying nothing, right? And I told Vince, I said, would you do that? And he, oh, pal, get him on the phone. And they went as far as having the attorneys, because Rick was actually in his car, and he had that Mercedes, or was it a BMW? He actually had a phone before he had cell phones. He had a phone in his fucking car. He and Reed were circling the Greensboro Coliseum the day of that pay-per-view. Vince couldn't get on the phone with him because he didn't want to be arrested for or accused of contract tampering. So he was having me talk to him because we're just talking as friends, and I'm getting him the 2 free tickets. And Rick was talking to his attorney, which I think still at that time was still John Taylor from down in Atlanta, from the old Chory and Taylor firm. Anyway, Vince was all for it. I couldn't wait to see the fucking pop, and Rick just really wanted to fuck WCW, but his attorney finally said, nah, with where we are in the legal thing or whatever in your contract and blah, 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 don't do it. So they turned around and drove back to Charlotte. But that would have been a good deal. But anyway, so sometime after all this had gone down, it was in the WWF locker room, wasn't it? It was.
Yes, it was. It was after Bischoff came to the WWF. Yeah.
Basically, early 2000s, mid 2000s, somebody look up and do the timeline. After all the problems that they'd had with each other in WCW, Flair is in the WWF. Bischoff comes to the WWF to do his first run as an on-air performer. Flair was in a bad mood one day, apparently, and basically just fucking went in the locker room to Bischoff and said, all right, you motherfucker, you didn't want me to see my fucking son's fucking match, and you fucking told people you're going to sue me in the poorhouse, and fuck you, and took him down and was going for his fucking eye. And Arn, I believe, was watching the door until numbers, overwhelmed him. Then he joined in the breaking up of it. But he was, at first, he was watching the door. And fucking Eric Bischoff's kung fu grip didn't do shit to fucking Ric Flair. That's why I said Vince McMahon's more of a man, more of a confrontational human being, aggressive than Bischoff is. Bischoff, the first thing he did when we had the table for three was fucking bond with me over my our mutual hatred of Vince Russo. He likes to fucking ingratiate himself to people, and Vince doesn't give a shit. And Flair was not in the mood to be ingratiating that day. So that's the point, is Bischoff is 0 for life when it comes to actual physical conflict with any of the boys. He just likes to claim that he fucking took all these courses and fucking, I guess he was Bruce Lee's goddamn Jeet Kune Do fucking apprentice or whatever. And that's why he gave Sonny Ono a job. Sonny Ono was his karate instructor, right? So he gives Sonny Ono a job. Like he was a goddamn wrestling personality. And ended up suing him. All these motherfuckers. I'm astonished. But anyway, that was the story with Flair and Bischoff, and he got my eye, Lance. He got my goddamn eye.